this is a situation where everyone assumes more is better, but it does depend on what is it that you're trying to sell.
Mm-hmm.
How much individual personal custom service
Mm-hmm.
is associated with it. If it truly is a set it and forget it kind of activity, then quite honestly, you could probably sell it relatively cheap and sell 10,000 of them.
Mm-hmm.
You go. Great. But if you are wanting to provide any amount of interaction, customization, any of the rest of it, then you've got to start figuring out, where does more people take more time?
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. What if I told you that taking on fewer clients could actually make you more money? Would you believe me? Because if you're like most entrepreneurs, you've probably been taught that growth means constantly adding to your client load. But today on The Business You Really Want, we are going to challenge that assumption and show you why finding your sweet spot in client capacity might be the key to sustainable success. And when we say sweet spot, what we're talking about is that comfortable place between where you feel like you're delivering your service with excellence, your clients are happy with the service that they're getting from you, and you are achieving your financial goals. I'm Tonya Kubo, and I'm joined by my co-host and business advisor extraordinaire, Gwen Bortner. Today, we are tackling a question that comes up constantly with solopreneurs and small business owners. How many clients should I really be serving? Now, Gwen, I know that this happens to be something that people hire you very often for. You help business owners optimize their client load. So can you help us understand what typically brings a service provider to the crossroads?
So it's at a point, our whole model is to help people build sustainable businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happened is they're at a space that it's no longer sustainable. They're working too many hours, or they're starting to grow a payroll that's making them uncomfortable. Or, there's a number of things that it all falls under the umbrella of sustainable. There's something about what's going on that does not feel sustainable over the long term. And like I said, it can look like a whole lot of things. And this is where our process of saying, so what does success truly mean to you, is super, super important, because three people whose businesses look almost identical, kind of on the outside, we might give three completely different answers to, of how do we solve this problem? How do we right size it for you, depending on what their real definition of success is. And that's the thing, is that there's lots of ways to answer this particular problem. There is not a right way. The general answer that is the right answer is, let's right size your business, your model, and your pricing.
Okay. So really, clients are just a variable in the overall equation.
That they are a variable in the overall equation. It could be what we actually need is more clients, and we're going to bring in people. It could be we need less clients, but we need to charge them more. It could be some combination of both. Of we need more clients at this level, which these people can serve, but we need less clients at this level, which we need to charge more for. I mean, there's a lot of variables that play into it to get us to what the absolute right answer is. But the problem is first to identify what really is the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And, kind of common knowledge always says raise your prices, which could be right, but it also could be wrong, depending on what you're looking for. One of my answers is is if nobody is ever saying no to your offer, like if you're converting, 100% or awfully close to 100%, that probably means you need to raise your prices,
Yeah.
right? Particularly if you're feeling overwhelmed
Mhm.
at
Yeah.
at this point in time, because raise your prices. And when I say raise your prices, I'm not saying go from $100 to $110. You know, I'm saying raise your prices from 100 to
Mhm.
200,
Yeah.
because there'll be people who will start saying no. And if they don't, raise them again.
Yeah. Then you go from 200 to 400
Right.
until
Yeah.
people start saying no.
Because
And
at some
then,
point they'll start saying
yeah.
no. And I'm not saying you want to get it to where most people are saying no, because
No.
that's the other side of the problem. That means you've not right sized. But the
Mhm.
first thing is to try and get your pricing right sized based on what
Mhm.
you're trying to offer. This is a situation where everyone assumes more is better, but it does depend on what is it that you're trying to sell.
Mhm.
How much individual personal custom service
Mhm.
is associated with it. If it truly is a set it and forget it kind of activity,
Mhm.
then, quite honestly, you could probably sell it relatively cheap and sell 10,000 of them.
Mhm.
You go. Great. But if you are wanting to provide any amount of interaction,
Mhm.
customization, any of the rest of it, then you've got to start figuring out does more people take more time. And I'm doing it as a flowing kind of motion, but it tends to
Mhm.
be like jump, 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 jump. Up to a 50 people is X, and then the 51st person somehow makes it Y, which is very, very different.
Right. Right. And so we've talked about, what it looks like how to recognize that you are overloaded, right? Like that
Right.
your client load has exceeded capacity. And, you're working too many hours, or maybe you're paying out way too much in overhead. Maybe you're stressed out. Maybe you don't feel that like you're delivering your best. You might be missing deadlines. You might
Right.
be
Yeah. There
rushing
could be all sorts of
deliverables.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to kind of lay that out. Like these are all because I think I'm just going to speak for myself, but I'm going to speak for other female service providers I know. We default to like we suck, like hands down, right? If I was better, smarter, faster, like a grown up business owner, I could churn out this stuff with 5-star excellence to this number of clients. I don't think most of us I don't think it ever occurs to most of us that we're actually overbooked.
Yeah, because w- in this world of you should always be growing,
Mhm.
it never occurs to anyone that you can grow. If we're going to use a
Mhm.
plant metaphor, you can grow beyond your pot and break your pot.
Mhm.
Right? Because it's like, oh, we're always growing. Well, if you put, we live in California, and so we have, giant sequoias, which will live potentially for thousands of years and become truly huge,
Mhm.
right? And so when people talk about growing and growing and growing, growing,
Mhm.
my image always is that, because they actually do grow for thousands of years
Mhm.
and live for thousands of years. Most things don't actually live that long. It's just not the way it
Mhm.
works. But when they start out, they are the tiniest seed. Oh my gosh, they are the seed is microscopic. It is super, super small. And they start out as this little tiny, tiny, tiny tree.
Mhm.
And over time, they start growing and growing and growing. Well, if you put that tree in a pot to start, it would be fine. But at some point, it's going to bust the pot,
Right.
right? And and we don't think about our growth could be busting
Mhm.
our own pot.
Yeah. So we've talked about how to recognize when you're beyond capacity. And I just presented the idea that potentially it's not so much a you problem as it is a too many people problem. Is there a way? And this is a genuine question, Gwen, because I have not figured it out for myself yet, and I have been at this for a long time. But is there a way to figure out your perfect client number? Do you got a formula for me? Because I'm going to write it down if you do.
I might come closer to having you always want a formula and I almost never have one. I might actually have one for you on this. So you can be very excited about.
I just want the listeners to know we did not plan that, but I'll take it.
And it's not perfect. Okay. So I've got to get that little disclaimer in there. One of the things that we talked about when I used to work at Ernst & Young, which is a giant worldwide accounting firm, was we would talk about what the term is used as utilization. Okay.
Utilization. That's so fancy, Gwen.
I know it's a fancy term. And what it means is how many hours you bill versus how many hours you work. Okay. So using just a standard 40-hour work week as an example, not saying that that's right and that needs to be your number, but I'm just, we got to work with something that's tangible. So 40-hour work week. So if you say you want 100% utilization, that means that you're billing 40 hours per week. Now that means that if you're only working 40 hours a week, you don't actually have any time, or you're billing for things like recording your time that you're working on the client.
Right.
Right. And one of the methodologies, and lawyers use this too. So this is fairly standard for accounting and attorneys. Most other service providers don't typically look at this, but it's fairly standard for them. The giant firms, when they bring in their lowest level people, they're expecting nearly 100% utilization, which means they're really expecting their folks to work probably 50 or 60 hours every week, because there's other work that has to be done.
Like 40 hours of billable time, and then you're not paid for the extra time.
Right, because they're on salary. They're they're just doing their work, right? But I think about utilization as a solopreneur as well. And utilization, typically, depending on the type of work that you're doing, most of us can run somewhere between 60 and 80% utilization. Okay. As a solopreneur or nearly solopreneur, relatively small business, we can bill. So doing actual client work that would be billable kind of client work. And this, of course, is back to, we're really talking service providers here as opposed to people who are doing product. But you can think about it a little bit in the product way too, of how much time are you working on creating product, right?
Yeah.
So long as you don't have a much larger staff. If you have a larger staff, the more you move into management, the less your utilization becomes. So even on the big firms, the lowest level folks were expected basically to have 100% utilization. But as you started moving up and got a little bit more into even entry level management, it went down to like 85%, which is still a whole lot. And then it went to 80. But if you got to partner level, the very, very senior level, their utilization expectations were much, much, much smaller. Because their job is to go out and create new business, which isn't actually a billable activity until someone signs on the contract, right?
Right.
So there's varying pieces there. But if you're a solopreneur, that means you're doing all of it. Right. And so, like I said, between 60 and 80 is actually reasonable. If you're doing less than 60, that means you've got way too much administration and busy work that you're involved in. And this is one of those places where we would say, what can you just stop doing for a while?
Yeah.
Right. And people say, oh, but I'm doing lots of sales and marketing. Well, if your utilization isn't up to that, that's fine to fill it with that, but don't fill it with that in lieu of actually doing client delivery work. Right. And so that's the place, is a lot of times people say that they're overly busy, but it's not that they actually have too many clients. It's that they're still doing all of the stuff, too many of the things that they don't need to be doing now that they have more clients.
Right.
I don't need to go to every networking meeting when I've started filling up my client roster.
Yeah.
It's part of the not that I won't go to any, but I don't need to go to all of them.
Right.
Right. So there's some trade-off that goes on there. Right. And so part of it is understanding, how are you utilizing your total time? And so sometimes, like I said, it's not actually that you have too many clients, it's that you've kept too much of the other activities.
Right. So you may have too many clients. That's a possibility. You may have too much admin on your plate for the client load. What other factors could be there?
And then, of course, back to what we talked about before, that if
Mhm.
you've got too many clients, it may be that you're not charging enough for what you're doing.
Right.
It's too easy for them to say yes. But one of the things when we start thinking about this is to say, how much time does it actually take to support a client?
Mhm.
And this is another place that all people, this is not often we talk about women thing. This is not a woman thing. This is an all people thing. Unless you're highly aware of time, which very few people are, we all think we are, but we're not really. We greatly underestimate how much time it actually takes to deliver our service.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm going to use myself as an example. Um, a lot of the work I do is one-on-one coaching,
Mhm.
right? And so I meet with somebody for an hour, and we could say that only takes an hour because I don't have to do a lot of prep because I'm not delivering things to people in that way. I'm just delivering my brain, right? So that doesn't take me very much time. I don't have to, do a big prep thing for it. And we could say it takes an hour. That's what it is. But that's not quite true because we record our calls. I put those recordings in our CRM system. And so a 1 hour call is probably 1 hour and 5 minutes. I mean, it's not a big giant thing. And you say, oh, yeah, but it's just 5 minutes. It's not a deal. Yeah, but if we talk about 6 calls in a day, which I'm a weirdo, I could have 6 client calls in a
I
day.
was gonna say you often have 6 client calls in a day.
That actually is another half an hour,
Mhm.
right? 6 times 5 is 30 minutes. That's another half an hour added on to it. So all of a sudden, what I thought was going to take 6 hours is really taking 6.5 hours.
Mhm.
That's where we start feeling overwhelmed because I was planning on using those last 2 hours for something else, and now I only have an hour and a half. I mean, all of these things start trickling down, and so it's
Mhm.
being really aware of what is the total time. And the place that we get stuck, and I actually have had this conversation 2 or 3 times this week, is the tiny time. That little tiny
Mhm.
bit of time, like this
Yeah.
5 minutes, right? Because it's 5 minutes. It's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a thing, right? But where it adds up is, am I doing it every time? And how often am I doing it? Okay, so my private clients, we meet um, once a week, pretty much,
Yeah.
right? So using this 6 number that I said, that's 30 minutes every week, which is 2 hours a month. And then you say 2 hours a month, it's like, oh, that's 24 hours in a year. All of a sudden, that's half of a week
Mhm.
of time,
Mhm.
right? So, so the numbers get big as we start extrapolating them out. And that's where people miss why they're feeling overloaded, is because they're looking and they're saying, well, I've got 10 clients and it takes me 10 hours. And so it's 10 hours a week and that's no big deal.
Yeah.
But what they may not realize, depending on what kind of service they provide, is that they're actually doing 30 minutes of prep or wrap up with every one of those clients.
Yeah.
So it's not 10 hours a week, it's 15 hours a week,
Mhm.
right? And all of those, what I call hidden minutes, are the ones that are actually making you miss. So you have to say, no, my 10 hours of in front of the client is 15 hours of time. And that also means that we need to make sure that we're billing appropriately for that. Like we may say our hourly rate's $100 an hour.
Mhm.
Well, then for an hour in-person meeting, you need to charge $150
Mhm.
because you're actually doing an hour and a half's work
Right.
with that client. So there is a formula, and it is to say, out of my total hours, how many, somewhere in that, like I said, 60 to 80%. And if you're on your own, it's going to be more like 60%. If you start having some staff, it could be more like 80% because
Yeah.
they can be doing some of the other things for you. But it's also a way to look at how effective and valuable are the people that you hire to do client delivery work. Because if they're truly being hired only as a contractor to do client delivery work, they're to do your, lead your group program or, fill in any other way, you can look and say, so what is their utilization?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're charging me for 4 hours, but I'm only able to bill them out for 2. I'm,
Right.
making a simple example. Well, that's only 50% utilization. For a contractor that's really what their primary job is, they should definitely be closer to 80%.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so all of those things allow you to start figuring out how much should I and can I be working? And because I know you, I would imagine that your utilization probably runs at like 90%, which is why you feel like you're overwhelmed a lot, because you also have a whole lot of other things that you need to be doing.
So, all right. Well, so we have established my challenges here, but I want to do the math for folks.
Sure.
I think a lot of people listening really don't want a 40-hour work week, but since you...
I mean, it's just a standard, so we can work off of it. But
since you
yeah,
did the standard, I did the math.
But whatever your work week is, mine typically is supposed to be a 32-hour work week.
Right. But let's just take the 40-hour work week. When you're looking at 60 to 80% utilization, that's 24 to 32 hours a week of client time. So, if you're a coach or consultant who bills hourly, that's easy. It's like, do you have 24 to 32 hours of client calls this week, or do you not?
Right.
Now, if you are somebody who does packages, however, right, the math gets a little messier for you, but I think it is really helpful to say, okay, if I want to work 40 hours a week, then it's 24 to 32 hours of actual client work. And then I have, if I want that 80% capacity, then I get 8 hours to do my admin stuff. Also, if you want to only work 20 hours a week, then those hours that you have to serve clients just got a lot smaller.
Yeah.
Which then, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and that's where you start looking at what has to be sacrificed, where are you going with it? And like I said, depending on how much of the business completely relies on you versus someone else. Now, we're talking about it as a week, but just for myself so that people can see how it works, I think about it as a quarter.
Right.
Because we have our quarterly tune-up that happens at the beginning of each quarter, which is 2 3-hour days of time that technically all of the clients come to. So I'm not doing it as one-on-one work, but that's billable work. But we have more prep for that. So I also have to add in the prep that we have for that time. And so I look at a total quarter and say, how many hours do I actually want or can work? Because also in a quarter, I may take a vacation or 2. And so those are hours that I can't fulfill, right? If I'm the one supposed to be fulfilling them. And so I tend to, a week is a nice place to start, but then I tend to look further out to say, does this actually apply as I go further and further out, particularly if you've got group programs, membership programs, packages. Often if you've got a package, look at it for the package length.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, because I mean, in general, like you're always going to need more time, more energy at the beginning of an engagement than you do by the midpoint. And depending on how you deliver your services and what the agreement is, you may or may not have a heavier lift at the end of the engagement as you're wrapping things up. So we've talked about, we've got a great calculation for figuring out your optimal client number. This makes
I finally gave you one. There you go.
It's taken us like 32 episodes, but I finally got a formula as an answer to a question. And I am going to put gold stars on my calendar for this. Now, I think the next question, now that we know what our sweet spot could be, is how, if that doesn't align with our financial goals, because it may not, 24 billable hours may not net somebody's financial goals, then how do you increase revenue without increasing client load? Now, you've already talked about raising prices. That's one way to do it. But what are some others, do you think?
Well, it's a variation of raising prices, but it's changing your offer,
Mm.
right? And so uh, instead of doing a small offer to a lot of people, maybe you do a bigger offer to fewer people. Now, like I said, this technically is a version of price change, but it's not just saying I'm offering the same thing and raising the price. But and years ago, I can't even tell you how many years ago now. This makes me realize I probably need to raise my prices again. But years ago, I realized I was way undercharging for what I was providing, and it was time for me to do a pretty serious price raise. But what I decided to do instead of raising the price at the time, I would offer 90 minutes per week for my
Oh,
private clients.
okay.
And so what I did instead of raising my price is I charged the exact same price, but I reduced it to 60 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So functionally, I raised my price,
Right.
but what they were paying me was exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't feel like a price raise necessarily to them. I mean, I made it really clear what was going to happen, but I also realized I didn't need 90 minutes.
Right. That's what I was
It-
gonna say. Yeah.
60 minutes was enough, and they were going to still get the same value. So I didn't
Right.
feel like, I mean, like it was a different way to approach the same thing. Now, like I said, technically that was just a price raise. That really was. That was all. That was all it was.
Right.
But it was a different way to approach it. So it was a change in the business model, right? We did a similar thing recently when we decided to move the weekly course of action from a quarterly or annual payment to a monthly payment.
Yep.
Um, we used to try and count the quarterly payment was partly because we were thinking about the quarterly tune-up, which is part of the weekly course of action. And we're like, well, we put more time in there, and so they need to pay more for that. And we said, nope, we're just going to charge them month to month. And if they come in on a quarterly tune-up, and they stay for a quarterly tune-up and they drop after that, that's fine. But we're going to look at that differently, right? And so on the whole, we actually don't charge much different than we were. But from a perspective standpoint for the client, it is different,
Right.
right? And so the it's not exactly the business model, it's really the pricing model of that we changed, right? The service that we deliver is exactly the same as it was. And so there's ways that you can look at the business model itself and say, I want to do something a little bit different. Either I'm going to give them a little more and charge them a fair bit more, or I'm going to give them a little less and charge them about the same. Or, I mean, so there's multiple ways to play with that depending on what makes sense for you and what you're thinking about for your business. Because as you go forward, that's the other piece. As often as you go forward, it's like, oh, I thought I could charge a flat rate for this. Ooh, let's talk flat rate. It's one of my favorites. And
That's what I was going to talk about. So yeah, go.
And sometimes it turns out flat rate really is better. And it's one of the it's one of the things that we hear a lot where people say, stop trading time for money, charge a flat rate. Well, that's fine. So long as you really have a pretty good idea of how much time that's going to take, and that the value that you're trading it for really trades. But so many people are saying it, and they're saying it into businesses that people are really doing time for money work.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. This is one of those things that I just want to shake people. It's like, it's okay to trade time for money because that's what we're always doing. Even if we're selling it as a project, we're still trading time for money. We're just not telling them what our hourly rate is.
Right.
And it may be because for this time it's $100 for an hour, and this time it's $200 for an hour. And, but you still at some point are trading time for money. Very few of us have businesses where we're making such a giant impact on the business that we really can say, I'm not going to charge you anything near an hourly rate. I'm only going to charge you for the value that I'm delivering. I've got a friend that, she actually is such a high level subject matter expert. They talk about, I know which screw to turn. She knows which screw to turn.
Right.
And so she can give a piece of information off of the top of her head that actually, and for the industries that she work in, are multi-billion-dollar industries
Mhm.
that will save millions, if not tens of millions, and sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars with just a 5-minute conversation,
Right.
right? So she's not really trading time for money, but she also knows smart enough that she doesn't like just give that because then people won't value it. She's like, well,
Right.
let me get back to you tomorrow, even though like she could
Mhm.
totally put it out right that second.
Right.
I'll do some research and I'll get back to you.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to charge you, $100,000 for this answer,
Mhm.
right? Which is a bargain when you've saved them $10 million.
Right.
Very few of us are actually doing
I was gonna say, and, that is not me.
right. Very few of us in the
Yeah.
universe
Right.
do that, right? But it does happen. But
Mhm.
that's where people say, stop trading time for money, stop trading time for money, charge per project. That's fine, so long as you actually are looking at what the hours versus the project really are
Mhm.
coming out to. And often people do that because they don't want to charge what they want to charge.
Mhm.
But most people still end up trying to do the math.
Yeah, well, they'll do the math one way or the other, and that was what I was gonna bring up is, we did the episode where you coached me live, right, through 531 visioning, and where we landed was that I needed to raise my prices in order to achieve the goals that I had. And so when I left that call, it was, "Oh, this is interesting, and how do I go about that?" Because in my online community management and design work, um, packages and monthly retainers are pretty much the standard.
Mhm.
Because especially if you're doing the hands-on community management, it tends to be in small pockets of time. You don't jump into a community and work for 2 hours and then jump out. It's peppered throughout the day, and so that's hard time to track, and so that's just what everybody does. But of course, the problem with that is I could have, 17 years of experience in it and say, okay, my retainer is $2,000 a month, but mentally they're still going to compare me to an offshore VA who says that they offer community management services and they're going to charge 250 a month. And so like very quickly I discovered that, my package rates, even when I did have clients who did pay those monthly retainers, their expectation of hours that I would be providing was way higher
Mm.
than what my retainer rate was designed to provide. And then I made the mistake of when I started doing more fractional CMO work like I do for you, Gwen, is I carried that retainer model over as if the business model was the same, and the business model is not at all the same. And the value I provide to a business as a marketing officer or a marketing/operations officer is much higher than the value I provide as the person designing your online community, because your online community tends to be a tiny fraction of your marketing. Whereas if I'm overseeing your whole marketing and operations, that's a much larger pie. And so I went to, like, I still do package rates for the community management, but I have very much changed what services I offer over there. So that has helped to right size the client load on that side of the business. And then on the marketing officer side, I went straight to hourly. And what's been interesting is I have about a 50% like acceptance rate on proposals, right? 50% of the people are like, yeah, that sounds good. Okay. Because they've done their homework. They know what that costs. And then the other 50% are like, for what we had in mind, that's a little high. And it's like, oh, okay, that's fine too. And what I've recognized, because there was a part of me, Gwen, that thought I was going to be sad. Like, oh, I missed a sale. But what I realized is what they interpreted as marketing officer tasks were not tasks I wanted to do. They were lower tasks, right? But
Right.
because they didn't know, they just didn't know. So I love that you took us there on this idea of trading time for money, because I think in some instances, packages and retainers are in the best interests of you as a service provider and in the best interests of the client. But I think oftentimes they are one-sided and somebody is getting the short end of the stick.
Well, and using your example that you just talked about, one of the things that's super important to consider is like you said, part of the reason you do the retainer is so you're not tracking your time.
Mm-hmm.
But are you tracking your time? Because in your mind, you're saying, yeah, I spend about I'm making this up. I have no idea what you're doing, but I'm spending about 2 hours a week doing community management, for every one of these retainers. And that's great if you're actually only spending about 2 hours of work. But if you actually really tracked it, is it 2 hours or is it closer to 3 or 4 or 5?
Right.
And then part of the reason that it may not be working for you is you've said, I can do 4 retainers because that's 8 hours of a week based on, the rest of the stuff. But instead, what you've done is you've said, I can do 4 retainers and it's taking me 20 hours a week.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
which, by the way, it should take you, that's exactly how much time that should take you if you're doing 4 communities.
So, but that's the thing. Are you pricing it based on what is really happening or what you think it should be happening?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're doing that kind of work, like what you're talking about, that is where it's what I call the nickel and diming of minutes.
Right.
Gets you, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we were looking at offering insight to impact, we were going to offer it super, super cheap because it was like, we're going to be able to put that into an email system and it's going to be self-delivered and all the rest of it. But part of what is our selling point is that you get a response if you reply to the email. And it's not an AI response and it's not a chatbot response.
And it's not a thanks for responding response either.
It is an actual thoughtful response based on your response, which means we have to read it, we have to think about it, and we need to respond. And I say we, most of the time it would be me, but occasionally, like if I'm unavailable, it would be you, Tonya, right?
Right.
And even though our experience says we can do that in 2 to 4, maybe 5 minutes, which doesn't sound like very much.
Right.
If we sold it and sold the bejeebers out of it, and let's say we had 100 people who did it.
Right.
Right. And let's say it only takes 3 minutes. That's 300 minutes.
Yeah.
Which is 5 hours. So that actually becomes a pretty significant number. And that's per week. So that's 20 hours a month. And we were talking about selling it for $9, I think, at the time, right? And so you say, oh, well, $900, that'd be great. But it's like, is $900 enough to be paying someone 20 hours a month to respond at the level of that we need to be hiring somebody?
I was going to say at the level of excellence and personalization that we expect.
I'm not hiring an overseas VA for $15 to do that because they are not going to be able to provide the insight and and the value for it. And it was like, oh, this is one of those where the little numbers feel like this should be no problem. And then when you actually do the numbers, which I think is the other problem that people get into that we're talking about, where they're not counting the little numbers. Yeah. And the little numbers really, really add up over time.
So where I'd like us to end today is systems.
Okay.
Like, what are the systems that you can adopt, you can build, I don't care, whatever verb you want to use with it, but what are the systems that can be created to support your ideal capacity? Like, just throw out some examples for me.
Well, so one is actually from time, if not doing it consistently, at least from time to time, spend a week or 2 actually tracking your time, all of your time.
Yep.
So that you really know. Part of the reason I was really good at this is because I did work as a consultant for some of these bigger organizations, and I have spent most of my working life as some version of a freelancer where I needed to track my time. Yeah. So I have no problem tracking my time. And to do it accurately, you need to do it every day at the day, not like I'm going to go back and think about the week and figure out if it is not by the end of the day, it's pretty much useless. So you might as well not even do it, right? So that you can, and like I said, I would check for at least a full week and maybe 2 or 3 weeks either consecutively or within a week or two of one another, to get a big enough swath of data to be able to say, how much time really am I spending? And then go back and compare to your calendar or whatever you look at and say, if I didn't have this information, how much time would I say I had spent? Right. Based on my contract, my agreement, my whatever, I would say I should have spent 8 hours. And looking back, I see I spend 10. Okay. Right. So that starts giving you a better estimation so that you then can do this calculation to say what percentage of my total working time am I being utilized, and does it match up with where I am and what I'm looking for in my business. If I'm being utilized, 90% and wondering why I'm having to work extra long hours and all the rest of it. And like I said, do the utilization not on the number of hours that you're actually working, but the number of hours that you want to be working.
Right. Okay, so really the system is time tracking, which you've had me do, and it has been highly effective for me. So you get an understanding.
And you hate it. Let's just be perfectly clear.
Despise it. It makes me feel like I work at McDonald's.
Yeah,
no,
like,
sure.
You hate it with passion. When I brought it up, I was pretty sure you were going to quit.
Yeah.
Even though I only made you do it for a week. I could tell by the look on your eyes, you were like, I'm done.
Livid.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it's like, no, it's just a week. We need to.
Well, and what but our listeners don't, is the only reason I was able to do it is because I announced it in my own newsletter and I made it in a public document where everybody could follow along, because I needed that much accountability in order to force myself to do it. But that's topic for another day. But it worked.
It worked. It was useful, right? And although it may have been painful, it was only a week, and you have obviously survived.
I have obviously survived to live the tale, and I got a lot of really, really valuable data out of that exercise. So it's the time tracking so that you can start counting the little numbers. I think that is actually the most powerful system around this whole idea of client capacity, is the little numbers. Because little things add up big. And I think the most sustainable systems are the simplest. And it is very simple to track your time. Even if you hate it as much as I do, it's a simple thing to do, and to start adding up all those little minutes and see where you land over time.
Right. Because we came up with our insight to impact number because we've done the weekly course of action for so long, and we know we can get about 10 done in an hour. Right. It's a little more than what the email is. And so therefore the 6 minutes makes sense. That it takes us about 6 minutes, but we always think, well, it'll only take me a minute to answer the email, but you've got to open the email, you've got to read the email, you've got to reply. I mean,
right.
It's all those little tiny minutes, and they really do add up.
Yeah. So Gwen, what I want to say, right, is what I want to tell our listener to close is that finding the sweet spot in client capacity isn't about managing your time. But it kind of is, or at the very least, it's about tracking your time.
It's about awareness.
Yes, exactly. I think that's an excellent framing for it, right? Because if you want a business that is sustainable, a business that is profitable, and a business that's enjoyable, you need to know where your time is going so that you are really clear on whether you're charging the right rate for what you hope to achieve, and whether you are able to serve the right number of clients in the right way and still have the kind of life that you want. Now, if you're struggling to find the right balance in your client load, you don't have to figure it out all alone, right? Gwen was just talking about Insight to Impact. That is our premium weekly email subscription that helps you gain clarity on your business one reflection at a time. It's really an accountability subscription, as it were. Each Friday, you receive a thought-provoking question designed to help you examine your business operations. And when you respond, you get personal feedback to help you implement positive change. So head over to everydayeffectiveness.com/impact to learn more. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallywant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.